There is a multi-billion-dollar industry built entirely around convincing you that health begins in a bottle. Supplements formulated in laboratories. Powders derived from plants, stripped of everything inconvenient before they reach you. Capsules containing compounds that once lived inside a whole food extracted, concentrated, and sold back to you at a price your great-grandmother would have found bewildering. But here is what that industry does not advertise. The people who lived longest, who worked hardest, who survived famine and plague and brutal winters, they did not have a supplement aisle. They had a garden, and they understood something about timing that most modern gardeners have completely forgotten. Today, we are breaking down 12 vegetables drawn from the ancient gardening traditions of biblical cultures. Medieval European monasteries, Chinese imperial medicine gardens, and indigenous American food systems, all of them planted in July. All of them reaching their peak nutritional and medicinal value in the fall. Stay with me until number 1. Most people have had this plant growing wild in their yard for years, pulled it out as a weed, and thrown away what ancient physicians considered one of the most valuable medicines in the natural world. And when we reach number 7, I am going to tell you the story of a man in the Sinai wilderness completely depleted, physiologically failing, and explain exactly what the food that saved his life was doing at the cellular level, because that story is not just scripture. It is one of the earliest documented accounts of targeted nutritional restoration in human history. Let us begin. Number 12. Swiss chard, the plant that outlasted empires. In the book of Numbers, the Israelites wandering in the wilderness complained that they missed the vegetables of Egypt, and among the plants, archaeobotanists believe were consumed in that region during the Bronze Age is Beta vulgaris, the wild ancestor of what we now call Swiss chard. Ancient Egyptians cultivated it along the Nile Delta, where the same warm-to-cool growing pattern that makes July planting ideal today was observed thousands of years ago. The plant was not a luxury. It was daily sustenance for people doing hard physical labor under unforgiving skies. What is remarkable about Swiss chard is that civilizations separated by thousands of miles arrived at the same conclusion about it independently. The ancient Greeks used it medicinally, calling it sicula. Arab physicians, during the Islamic Golden Age, documented it as a treatment for digestive conditions. Indigenous peoples of the Andes cultivated related species of the same family, across cultures, across centuries. The same plant kept appearing in the same role: reliable, adaptable, medicinal. Modern nutritional science has begun to explain why. Swiss chard contains betalains, the same class of nitrogen-containing pigments responsible for the red and yellow colors in beets, which researchers have found to possess both antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. Studies suggest betalains may support the body's natural detoxification pathways in the liver. The leaves are also among the highest dietary sources of vitamin K, one of any commonly grown vegetable, with a single cooked cup providing researchers' estimated requirements several times over. For older adults concerned about bone density and cardiovascular health, the combination of K1 alongside magnesium and calcium in one whole food is something no single supplement replicates cleanly. Here is the preparation detail most people overlook. The betaline pigments in Swiss chard are heat sensitive. They begin degrading at sustained temperatures above 87 degrees Celsius, which means extended boiling destroys a significant portion of what makes this plant valuable. The traditional preparation across multiple cultures was a brief wilt in olive oil or animal fat, not a long simmer. 30 seconds to 2 minutes in a warm pan preserves both color and compound. That iridescent red or gold stem color is not just visual. When it fades completely, so has much of what you were eating for. Plant seeds about 1 inch deep in mid-July. Thin seedlings to 6 inches apart once established. For varieties, Bright Lights offers remarkable visual range. Fort Hook Giant provides the highest leaf mass per plant. Begin harvesting outer leaves after 30 days, and the center will continue producing into November. The ancient gardeners did not know about betalains. They knew that this plant kept growing when everything else stopped. Sometimes, that is enough wisdom to last 4,000 years. Number 11. Radishes. The underground pharmacy in 25 days. Radishes appear in Egyptian papyri, dating to before 2700 BCE, recorded as payment to workers building monumental structures. Alongside garlic and onions. The Greek historian Herodotus noted that the cost of radishes consumed during pyramid construction was inscribed on the stones themselves. Which tells you something important. These were not incidental foods. They were considered valuable enough to record alongside wages. In traditional Chinese medicine, the radish, particularly the daikon, holds a central position in the pharmacopoeia. Japanese herbalists called it the Great Cleanser. Ayurvedic practitioners in ancient India used it specifically for liver and gallbladder conditions. 3 civilizations. No communication between them. The same organ system. The same plant. The science offers a partial explanation. Radishes contain a compound called glucosinolate, specifically glucoraphasadin, which enzymatic action in the body converts to raphanucin and related isothiocyanates. These compounds have been the subject of increasing research interest for their effects on phase 2 detoxification enzymes in the liver. Researchers have also found that radish compounds may inhibit the formation of certain gallstones in animal models. Consistent with the traditional use that predated these findings by millennia. One important preparation note, the enzyme myrosinase, which activates these compounds, is destroyed by heat above approximately 40 degrees Celsius. Raw radish delivers the full compound profile. Cooked radish delivers very little of it. This is one of the few vegetables where the traditional raw preparation is also, biochemically, the superior one. Plant a short row every 7 to 10 days through July and August. Varieties like German Giant and Fireball mature in 25 to 30 days. For late summer, switch to daikon types, which need 60 to 70 days, but tolerate light frost and store through early winter. One thing the reference material mentions that deserves emphasis if your radishes bolt in the heat and produce flowers. The seed pods that follow are edible, mildly spicy, crisp, and in Chinese culinary tradition, specifically prized. Nothing from this plant is waste. That is a perspective worth recovering. Number 10. Lettuce. What Hippocrates knew about sleep. Hippocrates, writing around 430 BCE, recommended lettuce, specifically as an aid for sleeplessness. For centuries, this was dismissed as folk superstition. Then researchers identified lacticarium, a milky compound found predominantly in the stem and older leaves of wild and semi-wild lettuce varieties, which contains lacticin and lactocopacrine. These sesquiterpene lactones have demonstrated mild sedative and analgesic effects in laboratory studies on mice. With results, researchers consider promising enough to warrant further human trials. The ancient Egyptians considered lettuce sacred, associated specifically with the god Min, a deity of fertility and abundance, and consumed it in ritual contexts. Greek physicians prescribed it after surgery. The Romans cultivated it obsessively, developing new varieties and eating it both raw and cooked. Medieval European monasteries maintained dedicated lettuce beds in their physic gardens. The gardens explicitly designed for medicinal cultivation. The modern finding that connects this history is that lettuce contains dietary nitrates at meaningful levels, compounds the body, converts to nitric oxide, which supports cardiovascular function by relaxing blood vessel walls. Studies suggest regular dietary nitrate intake from vegetables may support healthy blood pressure within normal ranges. With results, researchers continue to investigate. For July planting, the critical factors are shade and seeding depth. Lettuce seeds are photoblastic. They require light to germinate. Cover them with no more than a quarter inch of soil. Use shade cloth at 50 to 70% coverage. Or plant on the north side of taller crops. Heat-tolerant varieties like buttercrunch. Summertime. and Salanova butterhead are not just marketing descriptions. They represent genuinely different physiological tolerances developed through selection over decades. In sustained heat, standard varieties bolt within weeks. These do not. Harvest outer leaves continuously. The plant will keep producing from the center. A bed planted in mid-July, managed with shade, can provide fresh greens through October. Number 9. Brussels sprouts. The frosted medicine. Brussels sprouts are not mentioned by name in Scripture, but the Brassica family to which they belong, including mustard, which appears across multiple biblical texts, was deeply embedded in ancient Mediterranean agriculture. Mustard plants described in Matthew 13, the parable of the mustard seed, belong to the same Brassicaceae family. Roman agriculturalist Pliny the Elder documented brassica cultivation extensively, noting specific medicinal uses. Medieval Flemish monastery records from the 12th century contain some of the earliest clear documentation of what we now recognize as Brussels sprouts. What is fascinating across the entire Brassica family is the convergence of use. Chinese practitioners use Brassica species to support digestion. Ayurvedic medicine used them for what we would now call anti-inflammatory purposes. European folk medicine used them specifically for wound healing and inflammation. 3 traditions. No common source. The same therapeutic category. The scientific basis centers on glucosinolates, specifically sinigrin, in Brussels sprouts, which enzymatic breakdown converts to allyl isothiocyanate and related compounds. Sulforaphane, present across the Brassica family, has been one of the most intensively studied plant compounds of the last 30 years, with researchers finding evidence of effects on cellular antioxidant pathways. Specifically, the ERNERF2 pathway, which regulates the body's own antioxidant response. The critical preparation note, the enzyme myrosinase that activates these compounds, begins denaturing at temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius. Brief steaming 3 to 4 minutes preserves meaningful compound levels. Boiling for 10 minutes or more destroys most of them. This is why the traditional preparation of lightly blanched or roasted brassicas across multiple cultures may have been functionally superior to extended cooking, even if the cooks had no idea why. The flavor transformation after frost is real and measurable. Cold temperatures trigger the plant's conversion of starches to soluble sugars, particularly sucrose and glucose, as a cryoprotective mechanism. The same sprout measured in September and again in November after 2 hard frosts will show significantly higher sugar content. This is not perception. It is plant biochemistry. The gardeners who waited for frost were eating a different, biochemically richer food. Plant in July. Space 18 to 24 inches apart, and resist harvesting until after the first 2 or 3 hard frosts. Varieties Long Island Improved and Gustus are reliable producers for this timing. Number 8. Beets, the blood food of ancient civilizations. The beet appears in ancient Mesopotamian texts, in Egyptian records, and in Greek medical writing. Hippocrates recommended beet leaves, not roots, for wound binding and blood conditions. The Roman physician Galen used beets specifically for what he described as conditions of hot blood. Ancient Jewish agricultural law included beets among the plants, subject to tithing, which indicates they were cultivated in sufficient quantity to be economically significant. Not merely gathered wild. The convergence of use across ancient cultures is striking. Chinese herbalists used Beta vulgaris species for what they called cooling the blood. Ayurvedic practitioners used related species for hepatic conditions. The pattern blood. Liver. Circulation repeated independently across civilizations, separated by geography and language. Modern science identified the mechanism in the 1980s and 1990s. Dietary nitrates in beets convert in the body to nitric oxide through a 2-step process involving oral bacteria and stomach acid. Nitric oxide acts as a vasodilator, relaxing the smooth muscle of blood vessels and reducing the workload on the heart. Clinical trials have found that beet juice consumption is associated with measurable reductions in blood pressure in study populations, with researchers noting the effect size is comparable in some studies to the effect of certain pharmaceutical interventions, a finding that has sustained serious scientific interest. There is something worth noting about the seeds. Each beet seed is technically a seed cluster, a corky aggregate containing multiple seeds surrounded by natural germination inhibitors. Soaking seeds for 24 hours before planting dissolves much of these inhibitors and dramatically improves germination rate and uniformity. This is one of those specific preparation steps that transforms results. Unsoaked beet seeds planted in dry July soil produce patchy, unpredictable germination. Soaked seeds planted in prepared soil produce an even, full row. Detroit Dark Red is a reliable July planting variety. Chioggia, the ancient Italian beet with concentric red and white rings, is closer to what ancient Mediterranean gardeners would have grown, and deserves a place in any July garden for both flavor and historical continuity. The young leaves thin from the rows are not waste. They are among the most nutritionally dense greens produced by any garden plant at that stage. Ancient farmers knew this. They were eating both harvests simultaneously. Number 7. Cabbage. What 3 days in the desert actually means. We need to pause here, because number 7 is where the science of this video and the scripture of this video meet in a way I want you to sit with for a moment. In 1 Kings, chapter 19, we find the prophet Elijah collapsed under a broom tree in the Sinai wilderness. He has been fleeing for his life. He has traveled an entire day into the desert and then simply stopped, lying down in the shade of the only tree around, asking to die. The text tells us he had been without food and water long enough to be physiologically desperate. An angel touches him and tells him to get up and eat. Elijah looks and finds, of all things, a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He eats and drinks and lies back down. The angel returns a second time. The angel says, "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you." What is happening in that body? After extended exertion and inadequate food intake, glycogen stores the glucose reserves held in muscle tissue, and the liver become critically depleted. When glycogen falls below a critical threshold, the body begins metabolizing its own muscle protein for energy. Electrolytes, particularly potassium and magnesium, are lost through sweat and physiological stress in ways that impair nerve conduction and cardiac rhythm. The fatigue Elijah described the desire to simply stop living is consistent with what physiologists now call profound energetic collapse. It is not dramatic. It is not poetic. It is a measurable, documentable physical state. The cake on the stones would have been grain simple carbohydrates for immediate glucose restoration. The water addressed acute dehydration. But the text says he was given enough strength not for a short rest, for a 40-day journey to Mount Horeb. That is where cabbage enters. Cabbage planted in July and harvested after the first frosts of fall was one of the most critical food storage crops in ancient agricultural societies. But what the people preserving and fermenting cabbage throughout the ancient Middle East, Europe, and Asia could not have known is why it was so effective. Fermented cabbage, the lacto-fermented form consumed across these cultures, is among the highest dietary sources of naturally occurring vitamin C in any preserved food. Korean kimchi, German sauerkraut, ancient Egyptian preserved brassicas. Researchers have found that traditional lacto-fermentation actually increases certain B vitamins, particularly folate and B12, through the metabolic activity of lactobacillus bacteria. But there is something else. Fresh cabbage contains glutamine, an amino acid that serves as the primary fuel for intestinal epithelial cells. When the gut lining is stressed, as it is during extended physical hardship, illness, or poor diet, glutamine becomes conditionally essential. The gut cannot maintain its integrity without it. Ancient peoples who relied on cabbage as a staple food were without knowing it, maintaining gut barrier function through the most difficult seasons of the year. The angel did not give Elijah a list of macronutrients. The angel gave him food. Simple, whole, complete. That isn't just poetry. That is a description of cellular restoration delivered 400 years before the birth of Christ. If this kind of ancient knowledge resonates with you, if the idea that what Scripture preserved as story, science is now unpacking as mechanism, speaks to something you have been looking for, hit like and subscribe. Because what is coming next goes even deeper. For July planting, choose varieties, champion, or tobia for reliable heading. Give plants room 12 to 18 inches and let fall finish the work. The first light frosts reduce bitterness and increase the sugars inside the leaves. Harvest firm heads and store at 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Under proper conditions, cabbage stored whole in a cool root cellar can remain edible and nutritious for 3 to 4 months. A single July planting can provide food through February. Number 6. Broccoli, the anti-inflammatory food that predated the word inflammation. Broccoli was cultivated in Calabria, in what is now southern Italy, in a region that ancient Rome drew agricultural knowledge from extensively. Pliny the Elder wrote about a vegetable that matches the description of what we now call broccoli, noting its value for eye health and digestive conditions. Medieval Arabic physicians documented the same plant family for what they described as conditions of heat and congestion. Ayurvedic texts mention Brassica species in the context of purifying practices. The compound that has drawn the most sustained scientific attention in broccoli is sulforaphane, produced when the enzyme myrosinase, stored in separate cell compartments, contacts glucoraphanin upon chewing or chopping. This is a critical mechanism. The compound does not exist in the intact plant. It is created by cellular damage, by the act of eating. Researchers have found sulforaphane activates the ERNRF2 pathway, triggering the production of antioxidant enzymes, including heme oxygenase 1 and NADPH quinone oxidoreductase 1. These are the body's own antioxidant systems, not external antioxidants compounds that activate the cell's internal defenses rather than substituting for them. One preparation detail: almost no one mentions broccoli florets should be chopped and then left to rest for 30 to 40 minutes before cooking. This resting period allows myrosinase to complete the conversion of glucoraphanin to sulforaphane before heat destroys the enzyme. Cooked immediately after cutting, you lose most of the conversion. Rested for 30 minutes and then briefly steamed, you preserve the sulforaphane already formed. Ancient preparation traditions that involve chopping vegetables and setting them aside before cooking may have been preserving this window inadvertently. For July planting, varieties Green Magic and Avenger perform well in the timing needed for fall maturation. Sprouts with sprouting varieties like Calabrese or Purple Sprouting continue producing side shoots for weeks after the main head is cut. Patience with this crop is rewarded. Number 5. Kale, the bitter medicine that monks understood. Kale's medicinal history in European monastic traditions is extensive and specific. Benedictine and Cistercian monasteries maintained it in their physic gardens, the dedicated healing gardens attached to the infirmary, not simply as food, but as medicine for digestive and respiratory conditions. Medieval German abbess Hildegard von Bingen, whose 12th century medical writings remain remarkably credible by modern standards, documented brassica leaves in the context of conditions we would now associate with chronic inflammation. The convergence is clear. Ancient Greeks used wild kale medicinally. Chinese medicine used closely related mustard family plants for what practitioners described as moving stagnant energy. West African traditional medicine brought to the Americas through the diaspora incorporated collard greens, a direct relative, into healing practices for respiratory and digestive conditions. 3 continents, the same plant family, the same therapeutic applications. Modern nutritional science has found that kale contains one of the highest concentrations of lutein and zeaxanthin of any commonly consumed vegetable. These carotenoids concentrate specifically in the macula of the eye, where they function as internal light filters, protecting against oxidative damage from blue light exposure. Researchers at the National Eye Institute found dietary carotenoids from food sources to be significantly associated with reduced risk of age-related macular degeneration, one of the leading causes of vision loss in adults over 60. The concentration of these carotenoids in kale is approximately 4 times higher than in spinach per gram. The frost conversion phenomenon in kale is real and documented. Cold temperatures trigger production of additional sugars and suppression of glucosinolate compounds responsible for bitterness. Kale sampled in September, and again after 3 November, frosts will taste like a different vegetable. It is not psychological. It is biochemistry. Plant from mid-July to mid-August. Varieties: Lacinato dinosaur kale, Red Russian, and Premier are reliable for this timing. Harvest outer leaves from the bottom upward. The plant will continue producing from the crown through December in most temperate climates. 1 tablespoon of olive oil added to a kale preparation is not just culinary preference. Lutein and zeaxanthin are fat-soluble. Without dietary fat, their absorption is minimal. The people who dressed their greens with oil were, without knowing the word bioavailability, maximizing it. Number 4. Carrots. The royal medicine and the frost secret. Carrots appear in ancient records more frequently than most people realize. The Dioscorides Materia Medica, written in the 1st century CE and used as the primary pharmaceutical reference in European medicine for 15 centuries, documents wild carrot, Daucus carota, for digestive and kidney conditions. Medieval herbalists used it specifically for what they described as stone conditions, what we would now call kidney stones, a use that has found partial support in modern research, suggesting carrot flavonoids may influence urinary tract physiology. The ancient Persians cultivated purple and yellow carrot varieties long before the familiar orange carrot, which was actually developed through selective breeding in the Netherlands in the 17th century, partly as a tribute to the House of Orange. The orange color we associate with carrots is historically recent. Ancient versions were purple, red, yellow, and white, and the pigments in those varieties are functionally different. Purple carrots contain anthocyanins, the same compounds found in blueberries, in addition to the beta-carotene present in orange varieties. The conversion of starches to sugars in cold temperatures is one of the most consistent phenomena in root vegetable biology. As temperatures drop below 10 degrees Celsius, carrot roots activate enzymes that break down stored starch into sucrose, glucose, and fructose, a physiological mechanism designed to lower the freezing point of cellular fluid and protect the plant from ice crystal damage. The result is that a carrot harvested in November after several frosts contains measurably higher soluble sugar content than the same variety harvested in August. Ancient gardeners did not know the biochemistry. They knew that the sweetest carrots came from the cold ground. For July planting, Nantes varieties are reliably sweet and productive. Sow seeds mixed with dry sand for even distribution. Cover with 2 inches of straw immediately after sowing to hold moisture. Carrot seeds failing to germinate in dry July soil is one of the most common summer gardening losses. Entirely preventable with this single step. Thin to 1-inch spacing once established. Beta-carotene, the compound that gives orange carrots their color and that the body converts to vitamin A, is fat-soluble. A small amount of butter or olive oil with cooked carrots increases beta-carotene bioavailability substantially compared to consumption without fat. Every culture that traditionally ate carrots also traditionally cooked them with fat. This was not coincidence. It was accumulated wisdom expressed as cuisine. Number 3. Zucchini and summer squash. The New World food that ancient America knew. Here is something almost never discussed in gardening videos. The squash family, Cucurbita, is not a plant of the Old World. It originated in Mesoamerica, in what is now Mexico and Guatemala, and was cultivated by indigenous peoples of the Americas for approximately 10,000 years before European contact. The Three Sisters agricultural system: corn, beans, and squash, planted together in mutually supporting arrangements, represents one of the most sophisticated polyculture systems ever developed by any agricultural society. That means every mention of squash in the context of biblical agriculture is historically impossible. The plant did not exist in the ancient Near East. But what makes squash relevant to this framework is different. It represents one of the clearest examples of an entire hemisphere independently developing deep agricultural and nutritional knowledge about a food crop. Knowledge that remains undervalued and underappreciated in Western wellness culture. Zucchini, a cultivated variety of Cucurbita pepo, contains cucurbitacins, compounds being studied for their effects on cellular signaling pathways, with laboratory research suggesting possible anti-proliferative properties. The seeds contain zinc at concentrations that make them among the highest plant source foods for this mineral. The flesh contains lutein, zeaxanthin, and vitamin C. But the part of the squash most often discarded, the flowers, contain flavonoids and were specifically consumed by indigenous agricultural peoples for health purposes that researchers are only beginning to investigate. For July planting, the key is avoiding both the early season squash vine borer infestation that destroys spring plantings and the late season powdery mildew. July plants miss the peak vine borer emergence and can be harvested extensively before mildew pressure becomes unmanageable. Varieties Black Beauty and Castata Romanesco are reliable. Harvest consistently at 6 to 8 inches. Smaller fruits are more tender, less seedy, and continued harvesting signals the plant to keep producing. Number 2. Cucumbers, the cooling food and the wilderness memory. The Israelites in the wilderness specifically named cucumbers among the foods they mourned, leaving behind in Egypt. Numbers 1:15. This is one of the most precise vegetable references in Scripture, and it is historically accurate. Cucumbers, Cucumis sativus, were cultivated in ancient Egypt for at least 3,000 years before the biblical period. Egyptian wall paintings depict cucumbers. Sanskrit texts from ancient India document cucumber cultivation from approximately 3,000 years ago. Chinese records from 2,000 years ago document both culinary and medicinal use. 3 major ancient civilizations, completely independent, all cultivating the same vegetable and all noting its cooling, hydrating, and digestive properties. Modern analysis has found cucumbers to be among the most hydrating foods by volume, approximately 96% water containing electrolytes, including potassium and magnesium, in the liquid matrix of the flesh. The skin contains cucurbitacin C and triterpenoids, including cucurbitacins B and D, compounds that have shown anti-inflammatory properties in laboratory research. Traditional Chinese medicine specifically uses the peel, not the flesh. For cooling and anti-inflammatory purposes, a preparation distinction the modern habit of peeling cucumbers entirely discards. The bitterness that develops in stress-grown cucumbers is caused by elevated cucurbitacin levels, the plant's stress response. This is the same compound family that gives medicinal value at lower concentrations but becomes unpleasant at high concentrations when the plant is under water or heat stress. Consistent moisture during fruit formation is not simply about convenience. It is the mechanism by which the plant produces fruit with balanced rather than elevated cucurbitacin expression. For July planting, direct seed into warm soil, cucumbers germinate in 5 to 7 days in July, compared to 12 to 14 days in cold spring soil. Sumter and Dasher II are reliable slicing varieties. Homemade pickles is well suited for preservation. Keep moisture absolutely consistent through fruit formation. The ancient Egyptians grew cucumbers along the Nile's flood zone. Consistent moisture was built into their agricultural geography. You have to build it into your watering practice. Do not peel your cucumbers. The skin contains what the flesh does not. Number 1. Beans, the first agricultural covenant. Most people watching this video expected number one to be a superfood, something obscure, something expensive. They did not expect beans. That is exactly why beans are number one. Beans, specifically legumes, in the genus Phaseolus and Vicia, hold a unique position in human agricultural and spiritual history that no other garden vegetable matches. In Genesis 25, Esau returns from the field exhausted and trades his birthright for a bowl of red lentil stew, the first recorded transaction in Scripture. And it involves a legume. The prophet Daniel, refusing the king's rich food, asks for vegetables and water, and the Hebrew word used, zerwo, is most accurately translated as legumes and seeds, not simply vegetables. When Daniel and his companions emerge healthier than those eating the royal diet after 10 days, the text is making a claim that ancient readers would have understood. Immediately, legumes fed people through everything. The civilizational convergence around legumes is unparalleled in agricultural history. Every major ancient civilization independently developed legume cultivation, and every major traditional food culture discovered fermentation and sprouting as preparation methods. Processes we now know neutralize anti-nutrients, including phytic acid and tannins, dramatically increasing mineral bioavailability. The people who soaked their beans overnight, who sprouted their lentils, who fermented their legume pastes, they were not following recipes. They were solving a nutritional problem across generations, without knowing what the problem was called. Modern nutritional research on legumes is among the most robust in the dietary science literature. Legumes contain resistant starch fiber that reaches the colon largely intact and becomes substrate for fermentation by beneficial bacteria, producing short-chain fatty acids, including butyrate. Butyrate is the primary fuel for colonocytes, the cells lining the colon, and researchers have found it plays a role in maintaining intestinal barrier integrity, regulating local immune response, and potentially influencing systemic inflammation. The Blue Zone's research, the documentation of the world's longest-lived populations, found legume consumption to be one of the most consistent dietary factors across all 5 studied populations, regardless of culture, geography, or other dietary habits. Beans also fix atmospheric nitrogen through symbiotic relationship with rhizobium bacteria in root nodules, a fact ancient farmers discovered empirically rotating legumes through fields to restore fertility without any knowledge of nitrogen chemistry. They observed that the ground where beans had grown was more productive the following year. Roman agricultural writers documented this practice. Indigenous American agriculture embedded it into the Three Sisters system. Medieval European strip farming rotated legumes through fields on a multi-year cycle. The plant was restoring the soil through a biological mechanism that science would not identify until the 19th century. For July, planting your last reliable planting window for a full bean harvest before frost count 65 days back from your average first frost date. That is your latest sowing date. Plant 2 inches deep in warm soil. Succession sow every 7 to 10 days until that deadline. Bush varieties like Jade and Top Crop are reliable and need no support. Pole varieties like Blue Lake require a trellis, but produce more heavily over a longer window. The preparation wisdom that predates modern nutritional science: soak dried beans for 12 to 24 hours before cooking. Discard the soaking water and cook in fresh water. This removes a significant portion of oligosaccharides responsible for digestive discomfort and reduces phytic acid levels that interfere with mineral absorption. Every traditional culture that relied on legumes developed this practice independently. The soaking water. Across cultures, from ancient Mesopotamia to pre-Columbian America, was universally discarded. That universal practice, preserved across thousands of years of independent observation, is, in its own way, a clinical trial, one conducted in kitchens and fields rather than laboratories, with millions of participants across millennia. Esau did not trade his birthright for an unremarkable food. He traded it for the sustenance that had kept his people alive through everything. What ancient gardeners understood that we keep forgetting. There is a principle running through every vegetable on this list that I want to name directly before we close. The nutritional value of a plant is not fixed at the moment of harvest. It is determined by when you plant it. How? When you harvest it, how you store it, and how you prepare it. The same seed planted in spring and planted in July produces vegetables with meaningfully different compound profiles. The same carrot, harvested in August and in November after frost, contains different sugar chemistry. The same broccoli floret, cooked immediately and rested for 30 minutes before cooking, delivers different sulforaphane levels. The same bean, soaked overnight and cooked without soaking, presents different mineral bioavailability to your gut. This is what traditional food cultures understood through observation, that industrial food culture systematically discards: the processing chain: harvest, transport, storage, washing, cutting, high heat processing. Packaging destroys temperature-sensitive enzymes, degrades fat-soluble compounds, strips water-soluble vitamins, and eliminates the preparation steps that ancient cooks performed without knowing why. The supplement industry attempts to recover what processing destroyed. But a capsule of extracted sulforaphane precursor is not the same physiological event as chewing freshly chopped broccoli that has rested for 30 minutes. A vitamin K2 capsule is not the same as fermented cabbage, consumed with its full matrix of bacteria, organic acids, and cofactors. The whole food, prepared with traditional wisdom, is the delivery mechanism that 10,000 years of human biology was calibrated to receive. Every civilization that survived long winters, that built enduring agricultural systems, that produced the populations from which we descended, planted in July. Not because they read a gardening video, because they observed, generation after generation, that the garden planted in summer's heat and harvested in autumn's cold produced food of a different character entirely. The question that should stay with you after this video is not which vegetable to plant this week. It is this: what other preparation wisdom did our great-grandparents practice routinely that we casually discarded when grocery stores made it seem unnecessary? If this video shifted something in how you think about your garden and your table, please like and subscribe. We cover the intersection of ancient knowledge and modern science here every week, going deeper each time. Share this with someone in your life who still believes July is too late to start growing food. And leave a comment below telling me what you planted this July or what topic you want me to cover next. The season is not over. It is just beginning.